Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Social Work Radio with me, your host, Vince Peart. I am once again joined by my glamorous assistant and co-host, Tilly Baden. Tilly, my friend, how the devil are you? How have things been since you were last aboard the good ship SWR?
Hello, everyone. Wow, this is really exciting to be in person. We are here live in Ipswich and face-to-face, which is very strange because normally we do it remotely. So we've got our exciting weekend away for our fellow writers at Social Work News. So there's me and Vince and our editor, Nick, and Millie Glass as well. She's down here. I didn't say her real name, don't worry.
She's not on camera.
She's not on camera.
She's off camera.
She's hiding, hiding in the background. But yeah, we're here. This is, we're a bit hungover. Well, I'm a bit hungover today. I don't know about you're not hungover. No. It was a bit of a wild night last night, but...
As what? I think we better clarify that for the listeners. It's about as wild as things could possibly get for a group of social workers and an editor hanging out together.
I mean, Disney karaoke happened. And a bit of Eminem karaoke. That was pretty much as wild as it go.
We're not talking about the last days of Rome here, are we?
Absolutely not, no.
We're not talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's be blunt. Just so our listeners to be very clear.
Yes, we behaved. We didn't destroy Ipswich or our reputations. We are still registered social workers after that night. So
I had half a small glass of red wine, actually, so it was a wild one for me. And I cooked everyone breakfast this morning.
You did. You've been very gentlemanly this weekend.
So I would ask how things have been since we last caught up, but we're here. So on this week's show, we wanted to talk about wounded healers. It's a topic that we sort of discuss around the fringes of on several shows that we do. And we've written about it for the magazine before, and you and I have discussed it in our personal lives many times over the years. The concept that social workers can be wounded healers, and the concept that potentially a lot of social workers are wounded healers, because we quite often talk about, rightly, experts by experience when it comes to the clients we support, when it comes to the people we work with. And a lot of the time, that is really prominent when it comes to people who might be social work trainers. If you think of people like Jenny Malloy, Hackney Child, obviously she does a lot of work. I think she was last working with the Southampton local authority. She does a lot of work for local authorities when she trains people. You have other people, a lot of care leavers who go on to do that, been experts by experience, and they do a brilliant job. Obviously, it's superb to be able to learn from people who have lived through those things and how social workers can do it better. What is spoken about less is social workers ourselves as experts by experience. And, we joked about social work England just before in the introduction there, but let's be serious here. The reason why perhaps it isn't spoken about so much is there are things that a lot of social workers have perhaps gone through in the past that they would be a bit worried to share now, maybe things they've done or things that have been done to them or things they've experienced and so on, that could potentially be problematic and could risk, if viewed through a certain lens, of bringing themselves in the profession into disrepute, which is, of course, entirely unfair, but you can see why that fear is there. So I wanted to discuss that on today's show, listeners. For anybody unfamiliar with the term expert, wounded healer, should I say, most of you will be familiar with the term expert by experience. So wounded healer was a term that was first coined by Carl Jung. Most of you will be familiar with Carl Jung. He's one of the founding fathers, or the founding father of analytical psychology. And I'm kind of probably taking us back to first year university. You would have done a bit about do you remember that, doing first modules about the founding basis of psychology?
Yeah, and A-levels as well.
Oh, there we go.
Psychology A-level.
We've got an expert in psychology here today.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's the qualification right there, isn't it?
So there's a quote that I'm just going to read out from Carl Jung when he first coined the term wounded healer. And he said, "A good half of every treatment that probes at all deeply consists in the doctor's examining himself. It is his own hurt that gives a measure of his power to heal." Now, obviously, the masculine pronouns there are a sign of the times when Jung was writing and developing his work in the 50s and 60s, and of course referring to it as just the doctor. We're talking about a time when social work didn't exist as a profession. But because social workers predicated on the foundings of psychology and therapy, and of course Jung was one of the founding fathers of that, it still is prevalent throughout the profession today. So if we forgive Jung for that outdated way that he's written that, essentially what he's getting at is that half of most treatments involve the person offering support examining themselves, and it's their own hurt that gives a measure of their power to heal. How would you feel about that? Does a person's own hurt help them heal others?
It depends how it's done. I think it's really important that we're empathetic to the people that we're supporting, and to be able to put yourself into the shoes of others. You don't have to have necessarily experienced the same as what they're going through, but you need to have some level of overcoming some sort of hardship in your life so that you can recognise the struggles that person's facing, and then you can help them on their journey. But then I think there's something about too much of self-disclosure as well, and actually that can be really toxic sometimes, and you've got to be careful with how much of yourself you give over, not only to damage the relationship between yourself and the person that you're supporting, but also the impact that it has on yourself. Because if you're trawling through old wounds, then you don't want to be giving too much of yourself to your job and potentially risking burnout, stress, all of those sorts of things. So I think you've got to be quite careful about how much of yourself you give over.
What, like admitting that you've been hungover on social work radio? Like that?
Yeah, maybe. Oh dear. I'm sure our listeners empathise with me here.
On a serious note, let's be blunt here. There are some social workers who like to talk about their own issues a lot, and not just with other social workers, but potentially do that with other professionals, and also on some occasions potentially do that with the people we support. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be some workers that overshare.
We know some of them too well.
Vince, behave. But no, you've got to be careful that you don't give too much of yourself.
Yeah.
There's got to be some sort of boundaries there. You've got to deal with your own trauma in your own safe space, and sharing that with colleagues and with other professionals or the people that we're supporting is not necessarily a safe space. You need to be surrounding yourself with your friends, your family, and professionals that are involved to support you. So yeah, don't go giving too much of yourself to that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a fine line between drawing on it but not letting it affect you too much.
Yeah.
When I was doing my research for today's show, and I do research for the show, you might think that this is just comes easy to me, that I just have all this knowledge, but I do a lot of research. And when I was doing the research for today's show, I came across a statistic which said that around 75% of all people involved in the caring professions at a professional basis, so we're not talking about like carers, we're talking about like therapists, psychologists, counsellors, social workers, that up to 75% of people that are drawn to these professions on a degree level basis have experienced a degree of hardship and trauma in their pasts. Do you think that's right? Would you say 3/4 of everybody you've worked with in social work has? They could be very minor. If you look at ACEs, you're aware of ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences.
Yeah.
Some of them, most people I know would hit 1 or 2 ACEs. I think it's fair to say. I'm not going to reveal my ACEs score, but it's more than 1 or 2. Do you think 3/4 of social workers have had some form of hardship or trauma in their past?
I think it could almost be higher than that, actually. 3/4, so every 3 and 4. I think it might be higher.
You think so? 90%? How high are we going to go? It's like Price is Right here.
Yeah, higher, lower.
I'm going to give you 75%. Are you going to say higher or lower?
I think around 85, 90%.
And when I read that 75% figure, I didn't dispute it. A lot of research, because you get cynical as a social worker when you look at research. You don't always. You taught, again, come back to university days. When you did your research module, research methods module, it was called for me when I did my, when I was doing that like 12 years ago. Probably changed a fair bit now, but when I was doing it, it was called research methods, and the whole point of that module was to essentially instill the thinking that you have to question everything. Who funded the research? When was it done? How big was it? A snowball sample? Was it a random? It's all coming back to me. It's all coming. It's like that's a Celine Dion song, isn't it? It's all coming back to me now. Can we get some our editor? Can we maybe get some music over that bit? Can we get a bit of Celine Dion, written by Jim Steinman, who wrote all Meatloaf songs?
I didn't know.
Can we start talking about classic rock? No, we
need to stick to the social work.
It's all coming back. It's all coming back to me now. Now, those research methods modules, they teach you to basically question it. So when I saw that, I was initially thinking, do I question this? But then, yeah. So if I think of all my friends in social work who I know well enough to have had the conversations with about the past and kind of get a flavour, there's not one person I know that didn't have it didn't have a wild past, is the way I'm going to describe it. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
I'm not including, I may or may not be including you in that list.
No comment about that, but yeah. The majority of social workers I know that have built enough of a trusting relationship to be able to disclose that. I mean, hardship's relative, isn't it? Yeah. And we all go through different traumas. I think it's impossible as a human being to go through life without trauma. If you are, you're incredibly lucky. But there's different levels. But I think it's impossible not to, because this profession draws you in. We're still a very small and a very new profession. Yeah. We've only really developed our current ways of working since maybe the 80s, I suppose. If
you look at the legislation, I mean, I was just discussing this with someone yesterday, the legislation that, my entire profession's based on is, the Children Act 1989 in terms of my field. So before that, it wasn't regulated and set out like it is now. And in adults, I mean, how far back could you go in terms of an adult social work framework that you're still using?
Well, adults is very new. I mean, we're using the Care Act. We didn't even have statutory safeguarding until 2014, enacted in 2015.
7 years. 8 years.
I did my training in the old method when it was just done by policy rather than legislation. And then things like the Mental Capacity Act, 2005, came in 2007. I mean, mental health legislation goes back to 1983. So from the 80s.
You're looking about the 80s, aren't you?
You are, exactly. So I've completely forgotten where we were going with this before we got sidetracked with the dates of legislation.
You've basically just been ripping dates off. We've been testing our knowledge on legislation. So, Tilly, tell me about the 5 aspects of the mental capacity. It's like
I'd be a little bit worried if I didn't know the 5 principles, considering I work in a mental capacity act team and do training on this every week. Yes, I do know the 5 principles.
The point we're making is how the profession is relatively new and relatively young, and in terms of the way we're going on and how it's being developed.
And we wouldn't, because it is still such a young profession. Yeah. I don't think people would necessarily know about social work unless they had some sort of draw to that sphere.
I've got some sort of link to it.
Yeah, because I mean, everyone knows about doctors, because doctors is universal. Everyone knows about lawyers and teachers. That is in the frame of reference of everyone. But social work isn't. I mean, you ask the average person on the street, what does a social worker do? They apart from still children, the child catcher. I mean, you ask a lot of social workers, what do you do? I barely can define what I do on a day-to-day basis. So it's I think we are quite niche. And I think that is probably why there are so many people that have experienced trauma and difficulties and hardship in their life are drawn to this sort of profession.
So, as I like to do with the podcasts, I like to write about them a lot, and as I'm doing my research for them. So I've wrote a column, and it's It's going to be going up. For you guys listening to this, it will have been up. You'll have seen it Sunday, but as we're recording this Saturday, it's going to be going up later today. And I propose that there are essentially 2 reasons people are drawn to social work. So tell me what you think of these. The first reason I believe that people are universally drawn to social work is a desire to make the world a better place. I'm going to put it to you. I'm going to accuse you, Tilly Baden, that you want to make the world a better place. Are you guilty as charged?
Guilty.
There we go.
Absolutely. I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why I came into social work. I'm going to change the world, make it better.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this woman is wanton in her. She is wanton. She does not sit before you trying to deny her crimes of wanting to make the world a better place. Absolutely. She is brazen. She is brazen in her desire to improve the lot of the average man and woman.
Burn at the stake.
I'm going to put you on the Duncan stool. The second one, and this is the one that maybe let's say is a bit of doubt. The jury could be hung on this one. The second reason why I think that most people are drawn to social work, I think this is the second common goal, is they want to take negative past lived experience in their own lives and use it for good.
I think that's also very fair.
I stand you accused. I stand you, Ms. Baden. Would you prefer Miss or Ms? What do you go by?
Oh, that's a separate podcast in itself, isn't it? About feminism.
Well, I'm asking you. I'm just asking for your personal preference.
I'm a Miss in law, but I suppose Ms.
I call everyone Ms. The reason I call everyone Ms is for the risk of offending someone.
Yeah. When you're writing reports and things, it's best to just...
Ms. There we go then.
There we go.
Ms. Baden, you stand before a jury of your peers and you stand accused of wanting to take negative past experiences and use them as a driver for good in order to make other people's lives better and atone for your past indiscretions. How do you plead to that charge?
It's normally the other way round, me being the magistrate.
Do you like it? Do you like it?
I feel put on the spot. This is what the people
This
feel.
is good then. This is good.
I know, this is a bit of supervision, reflective supervision there, isn't it?
It will make you a better magistrate for this experience.
Guilty. Guilty or not guilty? Guilty.
Once you stand guilty, and do you know what your punishment is?
Being a social worker?
Yes. I'm going to punish you to 40 years of hard labour.
40?
Yeah, oh. 40 years in the local authority gulag.
Oh dear, I think I'll be dying in the job.
You've already served, haven't you? But you've had time on remand.
I was going to say, are you accusing me of being like 60 years?
No, but you've already served 8 years on remand, okay? So you've got
time off for good behaviour.
Well, you do. You can retire early. What's the earliest you can retire?
I don't know. I honestly think I'll be dying in the job. Retirement will be a thing of the past.
On a sad note, a lot of people did die in the gulags through hard labour. Just to bring it down the tone.
Yeah, let's
communism. People sort of call for communism, and I say, well, what about the gulags? People don't have an answer for that one.
I think again the podcast is taking a very different turn.
Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong.
Anyway, moving on.
What are you being cheeky with the judge for? Why are you being so cheeky? I'll add another couple of years on there.
Oh no.
To be fair though, women are regularly getting years added on the age they can retire, so I'm just doing what the government's doing anyway.
That's not a good defence.
I'm not. What I'm saying is the machinations of the government would support me in that one.
If you're comparing yourself to Rishi Sunak and all of the people that have come before
myself,
him,
I'm just saying the weight of their authority would empower me in adding another couple of years of work onto your sentence.
Wow. Anyway, can we role reverse now?
Don't put me on. Don't
I'm
me.
putting you on trial.
Right,
Which one about you then?
I'm sure that is. Is that how you approach? Is that how you approach the people that's before the magistrates court? Which one about you then?
Which one about you?
Is that what you do? All right.
Not very good English. Is it?
All right. So there's somebody who's been stood before you accused of fornication. You have got a fornicator before the courts. And
this has taken a different turn.
The first thing you say to them is, what about you then? No, let's get into role, okay? You're the magistrate, which should be easy for you, and I'm the social worker, which should be easy for me.
So you stand before me today accused of 2 crimes, and you've got the laptop where you're reading them in front. I haven't got anything written down. So the first one.
I'm swearing myself in. The first thing I'm here before you. Your worship, is that magistrate?
Your worship, yeah.
I remember stuff. I've had my legal training. The first thing I'm before you today, your worships, is that I am being tried of a desire to make the world a better place. That's the first crime.
How do you plead?
Guilty as charged. I believe in utopia, and I think we should all work together to have an easier life. Right. So my second charge is taking negative past lived experiences and trying to use them for good.
How do you plead?
I plead guilty to that one as well. What is my sentence, your worships?
Well, I feel like I should add on more time just for being belligerent that you are. So I'm going to give you 50 years.
Oh my God, 50 years?
50 years.
I'm 40 this year. That means I'll be 90 by the time I'm
you gave
retiring.
me 40 years, so I'm giving you 50.
You're younger. You can't force me to work. How many 90-year-old social workers do you know?
I mean, that's what the world will be coming to soon when they take away retirement.
I'll need it. Oh, well, okay.
You'll be going out there on your Zimmer frame and assessing people for the same needs as you are.
Wow.
But sad times.
I should have taken my chances and said not guilty.
Then there'd be a trial.
There would be a trial. And I'd get more time, wouldn't I?
Yeah, you would, because you wouldn't get time off for your early guilty plea.
Oh, no. What have I got myself in for? It was more fun when I was... can I be the magistrate again? Because I preferred giving out the sentences to getting the sentence.
I think most people do.
Yeah. Good.
Who wants to be sentenced?
Yeah, I don't want to be, so
okay,
you take that back. Take that back. Or to the Duncan stool thou shalt go. To a certain extent, I believe there's a wounded healer in all of us. And the reason I say this is, like you said earlier, everybody's had something bad happen to them. Unless you're very, very, very lucky. And you've had a very protective life and a lucky life, or perhaps a very affluent life. But that's not to say that, having a well-off life saves you from hardship. I mean, God forbid, some of the worst cases that I've worked with in social work have involved affluent families. I think we can all take that. What I would want to explore a bit more, and I'll ask you this, is we opened up by discussing how we can potentially overshare. It can be too much. And then you and I have said, well, we believe there's more than 75% of people, and we feel that we're in that category of wounded healer. I've never been accused of oversharing. I can't imagine you have either, because we're still here. How do you get that balance right? How do you get the balance right with using what you've gone through in the past to fuel your own healing, as Jung would teach us, but not to the point where it can become inappropriate, problematic, and create significant issues in your profession?
What a difficult question to answer. I mean, you just asked me how do you maintain your boundaries, and that's a topic.
How do you maintain your boundaries?
Well, I think once something is said, it can't be unsaid, so it's best not to say.
Like Hagrid, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Shouldn't have said that.
Shouldn't have said that.
Not have said that. How many Hagrid? Let's refine this to a very small question.
Okay.
How many Hagrid moments do you have in social work?
I mean, I've had many Hagrid moments, but not from oversharing. Just generally, like,
pulling a kettle out your pocket.
No, I haven't ever pulled a kettle out my pocket.
What Hagrid moments have you had then?
That I shouldn't
getting
have
kicked
said
out of Hogwarts for having a spider and getting framed by Tom Marvel or Riddle. Which one? How deep do we go?
Or having a pink umbrella and no. I shouldn't have said that. I mean, there's always times. I think every single interaction you have with
every
people,
podcast we have, certainly.
Every
podcast. I certainly go in and think, there's a list of 15 things I shouldn't have said.
But I think that's important about reflective practice, isn't it? You always think, I could have said that differently, or I shouldn't have said it in that way. That question made someone freeze up, or that didn't get the right response. I think that's just part of being a reflective practitioner.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are obviously times where you've said something that you really shouldn't have said. And I won't be discussing that on the podcast.
No.
But I think, but we all make mistakes, and I think that's part and parcel of being a social worker.
I think where most of the time I'm fine because I simply don't. I'm very, very limited in what I'll share with the people I work with. Generally speaking, I don't give up any of my own information unless I'm asked a question. Unless it's something relatively benign that's used to kind of build a bridge. Because that's, again, if you're coming back to Jung, it's like a Jung fest today. Coming back to Jung, he would teach you about, interpersonal communication, Carl Rogers in particular, so Carl Rogers was influenced by Jung, and what Carl Rogers would say is, person-centered practice is about building a bridge between two people. And you have to build that bridge somehow. And we've discussed this on the podcast many times before, where if you are overly professional, if you come in suited and booted, overly professional, very formulaic, you might get your job done in a perfunctory level, in a performance-based level, and a very bureaucratical level. But that's not really going to motivate people. It's not going to empower them. So in order to empower people, you have to get... I don't know any other way to do it than give up a little bit of myself, sort of humanize yourself. I understand the position you've been in, and to do that, I think sometimes you have to give up a little bit yourself. Now, usually that'll be if someone asks me if you've got kids yourself. Yeah, I've got I've got 2 kids. Sometimes I'll talk about going to the football. Sometimes I'll talk about boxing, gigs I've been to, just things that you might have a shared knowledge with. And you're like, well, look, I'm okay. I'm kind of, I'm just like you. You're just like me. Let's try and work together. It's not me versus you. It's me and you versus the problem. In order to shift that mentality sometimes from, local authority or state versus the individual, I believe you have to make yourself an individual. Yes, I'm not the state. I'm an individual who works for the state, and you're not your problems. You're an individual with problems. So let's try and, humanize me by, sharing a little bit about myself. Sometimes I humanize myself by criticizing the government that I work for. That sometimes tends to help.
Don't we all?
Oh, well, I wish I didn't have to do this paperwork, but we've got to do it, so let's work together. And you help to humanize the person you support, and by explaining to them, look, I know you've done these things, but, good people do bad things. I understand that. Let's move on. What life do you want? And then you can forward plan. That's when I'll tend to sort of share. Very rarely will I share things that have happened in my past. The only time where I'll tend to do that is not with the parents that I'm working with, but with the children. And when I tend to do that is at crisis periods for children, when they're separated from families' homes, when they're separated from parents, when the mum and dad are in conflict with each other, when they're going through the family courts. And the reason I will share it at that point, and I'll share it at very, very limited basis, and I'll document when I do as well, because I'm not sharing anything inappropriate, but I'll explain that, I went through hardship, my parents separated, my parents went through the family court, it was very difficult. And the reason I explain that is, I've got to be honest, it really does work. It every single time that I've done that with a young person, it's helped them open up, it's helped them feel better, it's helped move forward, it's helped get the voice for direct work. And it's always, I wouldn't even say almost always, every single time when I've been able to share, look, this was my experience, this is what I went to. Why would it not work? Because why would that not work? And, for me, when we come to being a wounded healer and how does that fuel you and what can you share, that's when I've done it. Most of the time, like I say, I don't share anything unless I'm asked, if it's like just to humanize myself usually. But when it comes to young people, I'm more willing to take a risk, if that makes sense, because I think if I was ever called out about it, and sometimes people might call me out about it, sometimes people might say, well, you shouldn't have shared that, and I'll have a Hagrid moment. I'll go, do you know what? I probably shouldn't have, but the reason I did it, I can justify why I did it. If you've gone by paper, you maybe shouldn't have shared the fact that, your parents went through very, very difficult separation, you were in family courts. Maybe you shouldn't have, even though it was, 35 years ago, but it justifies, for me, it always justifies it, because I can point, well, look what it did. It helped the young person feel better. It helped move things on. They're certainly not happy. Go and ask them about it. What do they think about all the fact the social worker said he's been through. He's been through this as well. What's the worst that's going to happen? So I don't mind doing things if I can point to the results. I would never do things for my own good. And I think, and this is coming back to what I said earlier, I've got to be honest, I think sometimes people do offload for their own good because it makes them feel better. Me opening up about that, believe me, it doesn't make me feel good now. It's never made me feel better. Even talking about it now isn't easy for me. It never makes me feel better, but I share that because it's for the good of the person I'm supporting. Would it be fair to say that some people overshare with colleagues, other professionals, and potentially even clients we support because they feel better about it and it helps them to ease the burden?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head right there. You've got to be doing it for the right reasons. Like for me, sometimes bits of me that I'll share it with people, certainly if I'm working with someone that's got dementia and maybe a carer in crisis or something, and I've said, look, I've had family members with dementia. It's a difficult time for anyone, and just try and make it a little bit more human and support that person in that moment. But again, it's for the right reasons. It's for them. It's nothing to do with me. It's not me offloading any problems. I think that's where people get into difficulties if they haven't perhaps dealt with some of that's happened before. You can't practice when your own house is in disarray. I think that's something that people struggle with if they haven't processed whatever's happened to them in their past, and they're coming into social work, and there's always going to be triggers because we're working with people from all walks of life, and if you've got trauma there, chances are it's going to get triggered at some point. And if you're not in a emotionally stable position yourself where you've dealt with some of that, that's when people, I think, get overly stressed, burnt out, and end up in difficulty.
And I think that can also make it hard for social workers that are going through current problems. You know, I think to be effective at social work, you have to give so much of yourself, and you have to work at such a breakneck speed that you don't have capacity for additional drama. And I think working too hard can significantly affect your personal life. We all know that. We talk about that all the time. But I think what perhaps is less spoken about, and I know the reason we don't speak about it as much, because it's really, really difficult. It's difficult to say, well, if you bring in your personal problems into work, it affects you as a worker, because you don't want to make people feel bad. If people are going through a difficult breakup, or they've got family problems, they've got additional care and responsibilities, there's a problem with the children, they've got health issues, and they're trying to balance work. We don't talk about it that much because it's really unfair. It's really unfair, but just because it's unfair doesn't mean it's true. And that's not to criticise the people who are going through personal problems. The criticism here is the job that it demands that much of you that you can't have any slack. You know, most jobs you can take off quiet days. Maybe it's got a bit easier in social work with homework and to manage your diary, but generally speaking, you can't have a lazy day. You can't have a lazy day in social work and think, well, it's okay, I'll catch up with it in a couple of weeks' time. You know, if you were working on like a big project for a company, like a big report, you're working in marketing or something like that, you could think, do you know what? I could probably have a couple of quiet weeks because I've got stuff going on in my personal life, and if I get to crunch time, I can do it all later. But when you've got meetings, reviews, reports that are always in, deadlines that can't be moved, court hearings, training, team meetings, and social work, your diaries are that packed, and you've got responsibilities for statutory visits and so on. You can't just push everything 2 months down the line, can you? It's impossible.
No, you can't. And you can't compartmentalise either. If you're working in a job, I don't know, at a supermarket or something, and you're dealing with a task that's in front of you, that's not going to be triggered by trauma.
Stacking beans
in the supermarket. Whereas if you're going through a breakup, and then the person that you're supporting is then going through a breakup, it's staring at you in the face. There's no let up, is there? So that's what makes it so difficult.
And that's why I like a boring personal life. I like a boring and safe and set. My manager's the same. My manager, she always, because we have personal supervision every 2 months, and she's like, "How's things going, Vince?" It's boring, nothing to report about still. The same white, middle-class, suburban married life. And she says, that's what I like to hear. Excellent. Then we finish in about 5 minutes. I'll moan a bit about the workplace, usually about procedures that I don't agree with. And there we'll go. See you in 2 months. It's exactly how I like it.
Yeah, there is a lot to say for being boring, isn't there?
There is. Do you know what? This is what I'm learning. I used to seek a thrill-filled, exciting life, whereas now I like to be idle and boring.
I think
as I enter my 40th year.
Oh, going through it. We're going to experience your midlife crisis.
We talked about this. I'm going to get into golf. I'm going to get into golf. Nothing bad. Golf.
There's a golf course right near where we're staying, apparently.
There is, actually. I'm not going to take it up today because I'd embarrass myself. Talking about embarrassing ourselves, I think we've done okay, given that we haven't shared any of our own. We've managed all this, and the only trauma we've shared is my parents' breakup when I was 5.
I think we've done
We've done okay, haven't we?
Yeah.
On that note, let's
get out.
Let's pull out. Let's pull out before anything bad happens. Okay. Listeners and viewers this week. The audience. Thank you ever so much, as always, for your interest, your subscriptions, your likes, your comments and reviews. We do this for you guys, and you guys give us the inspiration for this, so thank you ever so much. We'll be back next week with me and Tilly. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.